The glass door of the Rosewood Diner swung inward at 3:22 in the morning, and the woman who stumbled through it looked like she had walked through hell and decided to keep walking. Nora Bennett was 28 years old, but grief had stolen decades from her face. Her blonde hair clung to her pale skin in damp strands, plastered with sweat and cold October rain. Her left eye was swollen completely shut, the skin around it a deep purple that would soon turn black, a bruise so severe it looked like someone had tried to erase her from existence. Her throat bore the unmistakable shape of hands, 5 fingers pressed into her windpipe, dark marks blooming like flowers that grew only in violence. Blood, already browning at the edges, stained her hospital scrubs in irregular splotches. Her hands trembled as she gripped a phone with a screen so cracked it looked like a spiderweb made of glass. The diner smelled like stale coffee and grease that had been cooking since yesterday, maybe longer. The checkered black and white floor gleamed under neon lights that buzzed with the sound of dying electricity, a harsh hum that filled the silence of the empty booths stretching toward the back. Outside, through the windows, the Seattle night pressed dark and cold. Dead leaves skittered across the empty parking lot like animals fleeing something terrible. In the corner booth, 4 men sat in absolute stillness. Luca Calabrese was 42 years old, with salt and pepper hair swept back from a face that had learned to show nothing. His eyes were cold, the kind of cold that belonged to someone who had buried too many people, made too many decisions that ended in blood. He wore a black tailored suit that cost more than what most people made in 3 months, the fabric so fine it seemed to absorb light. A gold watch caught the diner's fluorescent glow on his left wrist. Across from him sat Marco and Sal, his lieutenants, both built like concrete walls and dressed in identical dark suits. Shoulder holsters were barely visible beneath their jackets, but visible enough if you knew what to look for. Luca's coffee cup froze halfway to his lips. Marco's hand drifted toward his chest, toward the weapon that lived beneath his jacket. The moment Nora collapsed into the booth nearest the door, not their booth, but close enough that they could see everything, something shifted in the air. The kind of shift that happens when a predator realizes something has wounded its prey. She did not see them yet. She did not know they were watching. Her hand shook as she counted the bills from her pocket onto the laminate table. 1 bill. Another. Another. $78. That was everything. That was all she had left in the world to keep herself and her son alive until the end of the week. The money for the custody hearing was due in 7 days. 7 days, or her ex-husband would take Oliver away forever, would take him to California where his new wife waited, where there was money and stability and everything Nora could not provide on a nurse's wage that never seemed to stretch far enough. Luca set down his coffee cup without a sound. His eyes moved to the phone in Nora's trembling hands. The screen was so cracked that she could barely see the text message that lived there, the last message from her sister Sarah before the car accident, before everything changed, before the debts came due. That message was the only thing she had left of her sister. She looked at it 10 times a day. Sometimes 20. Sir. Marco's voice was barely audible, a whisper that did not disturb the diner's dead silence. Luca did not move. Did not blink. His lieutenants had worked for him for 15 years combined, and they had never seen an expression like this cross his face, something between recognition and something deeper, something that looked almost like pain. 2 weeks earlier, his grandson, Michael, had been struck by a car in an intersection near Pike Place Market. The 6-year-old had been in the hospital for 11 days. The doctors said he would not survive. The organs were shutting down. The damage was too severe. Luca had sat in that hospital room and held his grandson's small hand and understood, for the first time in his life, what it felt like to be powerless. But on the 12th day, a blood transfusion had come through. A perfect match. An anonymous donation from a woman with rare blood type O negative. That blood had saved his grandson's life. That blood had given Luca back a reason to live when he thought the only things left in the world were revenge and death and the cold space where his heart used to be. He had spent 10 days finding out who that woman was. Not through hospitals, they had walls of privacy, lawyers, regulations. But Seattle's underworld did not have those walls. Information moved through it like water through a sieve. A nurse named Nora Bennett, who worked double shifts at the Meridian Hotel, who had nothing, who had donated blood to save a stranger's child because her own body was the only currency she had left. And now she sat in the Rosewood Diner at 3:22 in the morning, looking like someone had tried to destroy her. "Sal," Luca said, his voice deep and solid like an oath. "Call the hospital. Find out what happened to her." Sal moved immediately, already pulling out his phone, stepping away from the booth, his voice dropping into the cadence of someone reporting to authorities who would answer questions without hesitation. Nora counted her money again. $78. The number did not change. The amount never changed no matter how many times she counted it. The cold coffee in front of her sat untouched. She could not afford to drink it. She had $43 to last until Friday when her next paycheck arrived. $43 for food and gas and the phone bill that kept her connected to the custody lawyer who was bleeding her dry with legal fees. A waitress approached her booth, an older woman named Ruth with kind eyes and tired feet. "Honey, what happened to you?" Ruth's voice cracked with genuine concern. She had seen a lot of pain in this diner, but something about this young woman's suffering looked different. It looked like the kind that had been accumulating for a long time, like grief stacked on grief, like a building made entirely of loss. Nora did not answer immediately. When she did, her voice came out like a whisper, like someone speaking through broken glass. "My manager. At the Meridian Hotel. I made a mistake on a room reservation and he said I had to be corrected." Her voice trembled. She did not say the rest, did not say the words that would make it real. Preston Mercer had backed her into the supply closet. Preston Mercer had driven his fist into her stomach and then wrapped his hands around her throat and squeezed until the world went black at the edges. Preston Mercer, who knew she needed that job, who knew she could not afford to lose it, who knew she would not report him because his wife was best friends with Rachel Dawson, who owned the hotel, who owned the building, who owned everything. "I need to sleep," Nora whispered. "I just need a few hours." Ruth moved away, returning moments later with a fresh pot of coffee and a slice of pie that was not on the menu, pie that she was giving away for free because this girl looked like she had not eaten in days. In the corner booth, Luca watched everything. Watched her count her money again. Watched her fingers tremble as she lifted a fork. Watched her glance at her phone every few seconds like it held the answer to a question that had no solution. Sal returned to the table and leaned down, his massive frame casting a shadow across the laminate. "She tried to file a report with the police 4 hours ago," Sal said quietly. "They told her there were no witnesses. Her word against his. She works for Rachel Dawson, and Rachel Dawson made a phone call. The report disappeared. The hospital is running tests but they have not called her yet." Outside, the October cold pressed harder against the windows. The city slept while this woman sat in a diner and counted $78 and understood that it would never be enough. That love was not enough. That desperation was not enough. That the only currency that mattered was power, and she had none. What she did not know was that the man in the corner booth, the man the underworld called Don Luca, the man who had climbed over bodies and broken agreements and bent entire industries to his will, had just made a decision that would change everything. It would start before sunrise. By the time the sun rose over Seattle, Preston Mercer would be connected to 7 other cases of assault and harassment, all documented with pristine evidence. Rachel Dawson's name would be tied to financial crimes that reached back 8 years. The federal agents that Luca had been feeding information to for months would receive anonymous tips that would lead them to shell companies, money laundering operations, and a trail of corruption so deep it would require a 40-year federal investigation to unravel it completely. But none of that had happened yet. Right now, at 3:22 in the morning, in a diner that smelled like stale coffee and grease, Luca Calabrese watched a broken woman count $78 and understood something he had spent his entire life avoiding. This woman had saved his grandson's life not because she had to, not because she was paid, not because she had any hope of reward or recognition. She had given her blood to a stranger because that was what mercy looked like. That was what it meant to be human in a world that had stopped being kind a long time ago. And she had received only violence in return. The sound of rain began against the diner windows, soft at first, then harder, a rhythm like a heartbeat that echoed through the empty booths and the fluorescent-lit silence. 14 days before she would stumble bleeding through the diner doors, Nora Bennett sat in a chair that smelled like antiseptic and fear, watching a needle slide into the crook of her elbow with the kind of detachment that only comes when you have already lost everything that matters. The fluorescent lights hummed above her, harsh and white and unforgiving, casting shadows under her eyes that made her look like she had not slept in weeks. She had not slept in weeks. The phlebotomist, a woman with kind eyes and gentle hands, adjusted the bag hanging beside her. "Your blood type is rare," the woman said, her voice soft like she was sharing a secret. "AB negative. Not many people have it. This donation could save someone's life. Maybe someone very important." Nora stared at the ceiling tiles and counted them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 32 tiles in total. She counted them again to keep her mind from the number that consumed her every waking moment. $22,000. 7 days. Oliver. The custody papers sat on her kitchen table at home, printed in legal language that felt like a death sentence written in bureaucratic ink. Her ex-husband's lawyers had made it clear. If she did not have the lump sum payment by the court deadline, Oliver would be transferred to his custody, to his new wife with her perfect house and perfect income and perfect ability to provide the things Nora could not. The thought of losing her 6-year-old son made her want to pull the needle from her arm and run. But running would not save Oliver. Nothing would save Oliver. That was what the lawyer had said with a smile that contained no warmth. "You okay?" the phlebotomist asked, noticing the tension in Nora's jaw. "Fine," Nora whispered. "I am fine." She was not fine. Her hands shook as the bag filled with her blood, and she wondered if desperation could be transferred through plasma. If her fear could somehow poison the person who received this gift she was giving. But the phlebotomist had said it could save someone. Maybe someone very important. Nora closed her eyes and thought about Oliver sleeping on the couch in their studio apartment because there was nowhere else for him to go. She thought about his small hand holding hers as they walked to the grocery store where she bought the cheapest milk and the oldest bread to stretch the money as far as it would go. She thought about the eviction notice taped to their refrigerator like a countdown clock to their destruction. 3 floors above where Nora sat, in a private room on the 5th floor of Harborview Medical Center, a 7-year-old boy named Matteo Calabrese lay motionless under white sheets, his small chest rising and falling with the rhythm of machines that sounded like mechanical prayer. His skin was the color of porcelain, almost translucent, and tubes ran from his arms like roots trying to anchor him to life. The car accident had happened 5 days ago. A drunk driver, a red light, a moment of inattention that had shattered his world and nearly shattered him. The door to the room opened without a knock, and Luca Calabrese entered like he owned the walls themselves. He was 6 feet 2 inches tall with shoulders that seemed to carry the weight of an entire city, dark hair silvered at the temples, sharp features that had been carved from stone and refined by years of discipline. His suit was charcoal gray, tailored in Rome, worth more than most people's monthly rent. A scar ran from his left eye to his cheekbone, a permanent map of a violence he never discussed. His eyes were dark, almost black, and right now they were fixed on his grandson with an intensity that could have burned through steel. The doctor entered behind him, speaking quickly, knowing that every second mattered with this man. "We found a match," she said. "The blood bank received a donation this morning. AB negative. It is rare. Very rare. We were about to send out an emergency request nationwide. But this donor came in today, and the match is perfect." Luca's knuckles turned white where he gripped the bed rail. His face did not change. Nothing in his expression shifted or softened. But his hands told the truth. They gripped the metal like he was holding on to the last thread of his sanity. "He will live," Luca said. It was not a question. "Yes," the doctor said. "With this transfusion, yes. He will live." Luca stood there for a long moment, looking at his grandson's small face, and for just an instant, something broke inside his chest. But when he turned away, his face was a mask again, controlled and impenetrable. Find the donor, he said to Marco, who had entered silently behind him like a shadow. I want to know who they are. Everything. Where they work, where they live, who their family is. I want to know the color of their eyes. Marco nodded and left without a word. This was how it worked in Luca's world. Orders were given. Obedience followed. Questions were not asked. That same night, in the penthouse that overlooked Elliott Bay, Luca climbed the stairs to the third floor and opened a door he had not opened in 15 years. The nursery was exactly as he had left it. A crib with white rails, a mobile with felt stars hanging motionless above the empty mattress, photographs in silver frames showing a woman he had loved beyond reason and a daughter he had buried before she ever took her first breath. Sophia. The name caught in his throat like a physical thing, a stone he could never swallow. He had never said her name out loud since the day they buried her. 15 years of carrying a child's name in silence like a secret so terrible it could destroy him if he released it. The dust on the crib rail was thick. He did not clean it away. He just stood there in the darkness, remembering the daughter he would never hold, the life that had been stolen before it even began. And tonight, his grandson would live because of a stranger's blood. A stranger who had not known she was saving the grandson of the most dangerous man in Seattle. A stranger who had not known anything except that someone needed help. Luca sat in the rocking chair and wept in the way he had not wept since the day they closed the casket. Meanwhile, across the city in the Meridian Hotel, Nora Bennett was finishing her shift at 11 o'clock at night, her feet aching in shoes with worn heels, her lower back screaming from lifting mattresses and scrubbing bathtubs. She pushed her housekeeping cart down the corridor of the fourth floor, exhausted to the point where the world moved around her like she was walking through water. Room after room after room. The same walls, the same smells, the same feeling of being invisible in a place where hundreds of people passed through every day. Preston Mercer appeared in the hallway without warning, moving toward her with the kind of confidence that only comes from knowing you have power over someone. He was 38 years old, with slick back hair and teeth that were too white and a gold watch on his wrist that cost more than Nora made in a month. He was the hotel manager, which meant he was her boss, which meant she had to listen to him even when his voice dripped with cruelty. You were 3 minutes late from your break, he said, his voice flat and empty of anything resembling kindness. Nora's stomach dropped. I apologize, Mr. Mercer. I lost track of time while. I could fire you for that, he interrupted. Hotel policy. Insubordination. I would be well within my rights. Nora felt the fear climb up her throat like a thing with teeth. Please, Mr. Mercer. I need this job. I need it so badly. I am begging you. I will not be late again. Preston stepped closer, his cologne overwhelming and expensive. Then you will work the overnight shift Thursday. No overtime pay. You will come in at 9 and leave when I tell you to leave. And you will not complain about it. His eyes moved down her body in a way that made her skin crawl. You understand? She nodded because she had learned a long time ago that nodding was safer than speaking. Good girl, he said, and he smiled, and his smile was a blade wrapped in ice. When she got home at midnight, Nora found Oliver asleep on the couch, curled up with his stuffed rabbit, his breathing soft and even. The apartment was cold because she could not afford to heat it properly in November. Her studio, one room that served as bedroom and kitchen and living room and everything in between. A window that looked out onto an alley. A radiator that clanked and hissed and barely worked. But it was hers, and Oliver was in it, and for now that was enough. She walked to the kitchen table and opened her laptop with the cracked screen. She needed to work. There were apps for freelance work, things she could do at night after Oliver was asleep. Writing descriptions, editing documents, anything that would bring in a few extra dollars. She opened her email and saw a new message from the hospital. It was a thank you letter from the blood bank, a form letter telling her that her donation was appreciated and that it would help save lives. The words blurred together through her exhaustion. On her kitchen table sat the custody papers, and beside them, the eviction notice. 7 days to the custody deadline. The number swam in her vision. 22,000. 7. Oliver. 40. Her age in a year. Everything was running out, and she had no way to stop it. Her phone sat beside the laptop, its screen cracked from when she had dropped it last week. She opened it and scrolled back to her sister's last text message from 3 months ago, before the cancer took her. Before everything fell apart. The message was simple, just 4 words: "You are stronger than you think." Nora read those words and let herself cry silently, her hand over her mouth so Oliver would not wake, her shoulders shaking with the kind of tears that come from a place so deep inside you are not sure you will ever be whole again. She did not know that in a downtown office building, Marco Calabrese was opening files. She did not know that her name was being written into a document. She did not know that Luca had made a decision that would rewrite her entire life. All she knew was that she was drowning, and no one was coming to save her. Outside, the rain began to fall on Seattle, soft at first, then harder, a rhythm like a heartbeat that echoed through the empty streets. The rain fell harder now, each drop striking the diner window like a tiny fist demanding entry. Nora sat frozen in that checkered booth, ice pressed against her swollen eye, the cold burning against her skin. Her other eye, the one that still worked, fixed on the man across from her with the kind of terror that comes from recognizing danger in human form. Luca Calabrese was not what she expected. She had imagined someone older, crueler, someone whose face would match the darkness of his reputation. Instead, he was 49, broad-shouldered, with silver threading through dark hair that was combed back with the precision of someone who controlled every detail of his life. His suit was charcoal gray, tailored so perfectly that it probably cost more than her entire month's wages. A scar ran from his left eye to his cheekbone, pale and thin like a blade had once tried to cut him in half and nearly succeeded. But it was his eyes that held her, a dark, storm gray, penetrating in a way that made her feel exposed. "You are Nora Bennett," he said. His voice was deep and solid, like an oath carved into stone. She nodded, unable to speak. Her throat was already bruised from Preston's hands. "I am Luca Calabrese." He paused, watching her recognize the name. Everyone in Seattle knew that name. 2 weeks ago, you donated blood at Harborview Medical Center. That blood saved my grandson's life. His name is Matteo. He is 7 years old. You gave him a future. Nora stared, uncomprehending. The world tilted slightly. She had donated blood because she needed $50 for groceries. She had filled out a form, answered questions about her health, rolled up her sleeve, and watched a vial of her own life drain into a bag. That was all. She had never thought about where it went or who it saved. Luca gestured to the diner owner, who appeared within seconds carrying ice wrapped in a clean white towel. The ice was fresh, real ice, not the sad melting kind she scraped together at home. He set it on the table. Luca slid it toward her. "For your eye." She took it with shaking hands. "I do not understand," Nora whispered. "Why are you here?" "Because I have been looking for you since the day Matteo opened his eyes." The silence that followed was broken only by the rain and the hum of the diner's neon sign outside. Marco and Sal sat in the corner booth, barely touching their coffee, watching their boss with expressions that suggested they were witnessing something unprecedented. In 15 years of working for Luca Calabrese, Marco had seen him order executions with less emotion than he was showing now, leaning forward slightly, elbows on the table, focused entirely on a woman who had $78 to her name. Over the next hour, Nora told him everything. The words came slowly at first, then faster, like a dam breaking. She talked about her husband James, killed 14 months ago in a construction accident that the company claimed was his own fault. She talked about discovering the gambling debts afterward, $87,000 spread across 17 different casinos and loan sharks. She talked about the creditors calling at 3 in the morning, the eviction notices, the choices between medicine and groceries. "I worked 3 jobs," she said, her voice trembling. Night shift as a waitress, days at a warehouse, weekends cleaning offices. My body broke. I got tendinitis in both wrists. I could not hold a tray anymore. I lost the waitressing job. Lost the warehouse job when I missed a shift because Oliver had pneumonia and I had to stay with him at the hospital. I had no money for medicine, no insurance. I borrowed it from my mother. She is still paying that debt. Luca listened without interrupting, his expression unchanged, but something in his eyes deepened with each detail. I went to the Meridian Hotel, Nora continued. Preston Mercer hired me because no one else would. He takes my tips. All of them. He says it is for damages, author mistakes, or attitude problems. Last month I earned $340 in tips. I took home $16. He makes me work unpaid overtime, clean rooms that are not mine, carry things that hurt my wrists. And Rachel Dawson, the owner, she just watches. She pretends she does not know what is happening. And the custody case, Luca said quietly. It was not a question. Nora's hands clenched into fists. Oliver is 6. My ex-husband, Derek, he remarried. His new wife is wealthy. Connected. She wants to adopt Oliver as her own. The judge said I have to prove financial stability within 7 days or lose him. 7 days. $22,000. She laughed, a sound like breaking glass. I have $78. I have 7 days. I have nothing. She pulled out her cracked phone, found her sister's last text message from 3 months ago, before the cancer took her. For words, you are stronger than you think. I do not even know if that is true anymore, Nora whispered. Marco and Sal exchanged a look they had not exchanged in 15 years. In 15 years, they had never heard their boss say his daughter's name aloud. Sophia. The stillborn child. The grave he visited alone, carrying flowers and silence. Luca did not move, but something shifted in him. When he spoke, his voice was lower, rougher, like it was dragging itself up from somewhere deep. 15 years ago, my daughter was stillborn. Her name was Sophia. I buried her in a cemetery plot I visit every week, alone, because I never learned how to speak her name without breaking. I have saved lives, ended lives, built an empire on blood and fear, but I could not save her. When Matteo's doctor told me an anonymous donor's blood gave him a future, I realized that stranger had done what I could not. You saved him, Ms. Bennett. You gave life when I could only mourn death. That is not nothing. That is everything. Nora stared, tears streaming from her good eye. Her lips moved but no sound came out. Luca reached into his jacket. Marco's hand moved instinctively toward his weapon, then stopped. Their boss was simply retrieving an envelope. He slid it across the checkered table toward her. The envelope was thick, deliberately heavy. This is $22,000, Luca said. Cash. It will cover your custody payment. You will not owe me anything. Nora recoiled as if the envelope contained poison. I cannot take that. I do not take charity. I do not. It is not charity. Luca's voice cut through her protest like a blade through silk. It is a debt. You saved Matteo. This is what that life is worth to me. You are a nurse, yes? Before the hotel. Nora nodded mutely. I lost my license, she admitted. I could not afford the renewal fees. $3,200. I let it lapse. Then we will restore it, Luca said. You will work again in a profession that values you. But first, you will let me repay what you gave my family. Nora's hands trembled. She reached for the envelope with the kind of hesitation that comes from holding something that feels impossible. The moment her fingers touched it, she began to cry, not the silent, controlled tears she had shed in her kitchen, but deep, body-shaking sobs that came from a place so far down inside her that she was not sure she would ever be whole again. Luca watched her without flinching. He had watched men die. He had watched empires crumble. But he had never seen anyone receive grace as if it were a foreign language they were learning for the first time. Go home, he said finally. Rest. Keep that ice on your eye. Tomorrow, things will change. Nora gathered the envelope, clutched her cracked phone with her sister's message, and whispered one word, "Thank you." She stood, unsteady, and walked toward the door. Rain pounded the pavement outside. Cold October air rushed in when she stepped into it, and she disappeared into the darkness. Marco approached his boss. "You really giving her $22,000 just like that?" Luca watched through the window as Nora's small figure was swallowed by the rain and the night. His phone vibrated. A text from Federal Agent Sarah Reeves, warrant approved. Raid 6 a.m. Preston Mercer and Rachel Dawson. RICO charges. 40-year minimum. Your intel made this possible. He pocketed the phone without letting Marco see the screen. That woman gave her blood when she had nothing else to give, Luca said. She saved a child's life without knowing whose life it was. He stood, his movements deliberate, controlled. "Yes, Marco. I am giving her $22,000. And I am giving her something else. Justice." He made the call as he walked toward the door. "Agent Reeves. Move the timeline up. I want them taken at dawn. I want every camera in Seattle recording when you walk them out in handcuffs." Outside, the rain fell harder. Somewhere in the darkness, Nora Bennett walked home with an envelope that would change everything. Somewhere in his penthouse, Preston Mercer slept, unaware that his final night of freedom was ticking away. And in his black SUV, Luca Calabrese sat in absolute silence, watching the city lights blur through rain-streaked windows, thinking about his daughter's name and the stranger who had given his grandson life. The bathroom mirror revealed a stranger wearing Nora Bennett's face. Purple bloomed across her left eye, swollen shut, the skin beneath it split and raw. Her throat was mapped with handprints, Preston's handprints, dark bruises spreading like ink in water, each one a physical record of his rage when she had asked about her stolen tips. Blood had dried in her hairline. Her collarbones jutted sharp against skin so pale it looked translucent. She was 28 years old but looked as if she had lived through decades of war. The apartment was cold. 43 degrees at the thermostat because she had turned the heat off 3 weeks ago to save money for Oliver's school lunches. Dead October leaves skittered against the bathroom window, driven by wind that sounded like something trapped and desperate. Her breath formed small clouds in front of her face as she gripped the porcelain sink, her knuckles white with tension. The envelope was still in her other hand. $22,000. Cash. She had carried it from the diner to her apartment as if it were made of glass, as if the slightest vibration might shatter it into nothing and prove this was all a dream manufactured by exhaustion and despair. She stared at her reflection and whispered words that tasted like copper and ash. "This cannot be real. He will take it back. Preston will find out. Rachel will destroy me. They always win. People like me do not get saved. We just drown slower." The medicine cabinet hung open, crooked on its hinges. Inside, the bottle of pills she could not afford to take regularly, a bandage box with only 3 bandages left, a toothbrush with bristles worn flat from being used for 4 years. She reached for the pills, her hand trembling so badly she nearly dropped them. Then, a sound. Oliver stirring on the couch in the next room. His small voice, muffled by sleep and blankets, "Mama." Everything stopped. Her hand froze mid-reach. The bottle of pills hung suspended in the space between her fingers and the sink. One tear rolled down her bruised cheek, a single drop that carried all the weight of 14 months of drowning. She closed her eyes. Then she closed the cabinet door. She would not break. Not for Preston Mercer. Not for Rachel Dawson. Not for anyone. Oliver needed her alive. Oliver needed her breathing. Oliver needed her standing on 2 feet, not collapsed in a bathroom at dawn, not surrendering to the darkness that had been circling her since the night her sister died on a Greyhound bus bound for nowhere. She walked to the couch. Oliver lay curled under a thin blanket, his small body barely making a shape beneath the fabric. She knelt beside him and pressed her forehead to his, feeling his warm breath against her face, and she made a promise she would spend the rest of her life keeping. I am here. I will always be here. At 6:04 in the morning, exactly 36 minutes later, the Meridian Hotel's lobby became a place where silence shattered. 12 FBI agents moved through the entrance in tactical vests and dark uniforms, moving like ghosts, like a blade cutting through air, their footsteps synchronized, overwhelming. Agent Sarah Reeves led them, her jaw set, warrant papers held like a weapon. Guests froze mid-stride. Staff members who had worked there for years backed against walls, watching something irreversible unfold before their eyes. Preston Mercer was in his office on the 5th floor, sitting behind a mahogany desk that cost more than Nora's annual salary, counting yesterday's stolen tips. $37 in wrinkled bills. Money that had belonged to waitresses with empty refrigerators and overdue rent notices. Money that had been his to steal because the women who earned it could not fight back. His door exploded inward. FBI. Hands where we can see them. Preston's face went white. Then red. His mouth opened and closed like something drowning in air. This is a mistake. I have rights. I know people. I know. Preston Mercer, Agent Reeves said, her voice steady as stone, you are under arrest for wire fraud, racketeering, labor trafficking, and organized theft under the RICO statute. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Preston collapsed to his knees. It happened in seconds, the moment when all the power he believed he possessed evaporated. He trembled like a cornered animal, his expensive suit suddenly ridiculous, his gold watch suddenly pathetic. Tears ran down his face. Please, he gasped. I can explain. I can pay. I have money. I have? 2 agents lifted him, their hands firm and impersonal. Zip ties went around his wrists. The plastic bit into his skin as they tightened. Outside, news helicopters circled overhead, their rotor sounds filling the sky like mechanical thunder. Cameras flashed as officers led him through the lobby in handcuffs, his body bent, his dignity erased with every step down the marble floor. Simultaneously, 15 blocks away, Rachel Dawson sat in her penthouse apartment on the 42nd floor, sipping coffee that cost $47 a cup. She had been reading the financial section of the Seattle Times, thinking about her next acquisition, when her door exploded inward with the same synchronized precision that had struck Preston Mercer. 6 agents. Warrant papers. The same steady voice. Rachel stood slowly, her face draining of all color, but she maintained composure the way she always did, the way of someone accustomed to winning. I am calling my lawyer. Call him from Federal Holding, Agent Reeves said, and there was something cold in her voice, something that suggested she had been waiting for this moment. Rachel Dawson, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, money laundering, bribery of public officials, and racketeering. 40-year minimum sentence. Your empire ends today. Rachel lunged for her phone. The agents restrained her with practiced efficiency. She screamed, actually screamed, about her connections, her power, how they could not do this to someone like her, how she had lawyers and judges in her pocket. Agent Reeves leaned close enough that Rachel could see the resolve in her eyes. A very dangerous man spent 8 months feeding us everything we needed to bury you. He did it because you destroyed a woman who saved his grandson's life. You picked the wrong victim, Ms. Dawson. Rachel's face went chalk white. The cameras outside her penthouse captured her perp walk in real time, the woman who had worn Prada and diamond earrings, now in a black blazer, surrounded by agents, her hair disheveled, her famous composure shattered like glass. Every news channel in Seattle broadcast the same image simultaneously. Every camera caught the moment she understood that the world she had controlled had collapsed. At 6:02 in the morning, Nora was making Oliver breakfast, toast and jam, the only food remaining in their apartment. Her phone buzzed. A news alert, breaking, FBI raids Meridian Hotel, arrests owner Rachel Dawson and manager Preston Mercer on federal charges. RICO violations. 40-year sentences expected. She dropped the phone. The television came on with a single keystroke. Every channel showed the same footage: Preston Mercer weeping, his face a mask of terror and disbelief, being led through the hotel lobby as cameras flashed like lightning. Then Rachel Dawson, stone-faced now, her composure a facade that covered an abyss of destruction, walking toward waiting vehicles. "Ms. Dawson, did you steal from your employees? Did you bribe city officials?" Nora sank to the kitchen floor, her hand over her mouth. Oliver tugged at her sleeve. "Mama? What is wrong?" She could not speak. She could not find words. Justice had arrived not as death, too quick, too easy, too merciful, but as something far more systematic: federal prison, 40 years, every asset seized, every connection severed, their names radioactive now, toxic, the kind of names that would be whispered in warning for years to come. Later that afternoon, Luca Calabrese stood in his office on the 51st floor, watching the same news coverage on multiple screens. Marco and Sal stood behind him, silent, watchful. Marco spoke first. "Reeves says the case is airtight. They will die in prison." Luca nodded slowly, his dark eyes reflecting the glow of the screens. "Good." Sal shifted his weight. "You did this for the nurse." Luca did not answer immediately. He reached for his phone, his fingers moving across the screen with deliberate precision. "Then, I did this because some people deserve to drown in the darkness they created. And some people deserve to breathe again." He sent a text to a contact whose name appeared only as an initial: Nora Bennett. "Restore her nursing license. Cover all fees, continuing education, certification costs. Anonymous donor. Make it happen today." At the courthouse the following morning, Nora submitted the $22,000. Her hand shook as she handed the envelope to the clerk. The judge reviewed the paperwork, stamped it with finality, and spoke words that rewrote the map of her entire existence. "Ms. Bennett, custody remains with you. Case closed." She walked out into October sunlight that felt warm against her bruised skin. Oliver held her hand, his small fingers wrapped around hers, asking about lunch, about a cartoon he wanted to watch, about the normal things children ask when their world has stopped collapsing. She could not tell him yet that everything had changed. That the people who had hunted her were now in federal cells. That she had somewhere to breathe again. Across the street, parked behind tinted windows, Luca Calabrese watched her smile at her son. Watched her stand a little taller. Watched her move through the world as someone who had earned the right to survive. Something shifted in his chest, something that had been dormant since the day his daughter Sophia died. Purpose. Not redemption. Not yet. But purpose. And what neither of them knew in that moment was that this was not an ending. It was the smallest beginning of something neither had permission to hope for. The penthouse balcony stretched out like a confession waiting to happen. Elliott Bay spread below them, October water dark and alive with reflected light, the kind of night that made invisible things suddenly visible. Nora stood at the railing in a borrowed black dress, her nursing badge still clipped to her purse from the hospital gala below. 1 year. 12 months since she had counted her last $78 with trembling hands. 12 months since the diner booth and the blood and the man who had watched her break without looking away. Footsteps approached from the open balcony doors. Measured. Unhurried. She knew that sound without turning. Luca Calabrese stepped into the October air, his tailored suit black and perfect, his salt and pepper hair catching the city light. 42 years old but carrying the weight of someone who had lived centuries in the dark. When he spoke, his voice was deep and solid like an oath. "Ms. Bennett." She turned. Their eyes met for the first time since that night. "Mr. Calabrese." He moved beside her at the railing, both looking out toward the sound. The silence stretched between them like a held breath. Then Nora spoke, her voice steady but small. "I never thanked you properly. For the money. For everything. You thanked me that night," Luca said. "It was enough." It was not enough. Nora shook her head, tears already forming at the corners of her eyes. You saved my life. You saved Oliver's life. I do not know why, but I will never forget it. Luca turned to face her completely. The city lights cast sharp shadows across his features. When he spoke, each word carried the weight of a year's silence. When Matteo was dying, and the doctor told me an anonymous donor's blood saved him, I traced you through the hospital records because I needed to know who gave my grandson a future. What I found was a woman drowning in debt she did not create, working herself to death for a child she loved more than her own life, and being destroyed by people who saw her suffering as opportunity. Nora's breath caught. She had never told him these things. I watched you for 3 days before that night in the diner, Luca continued. I saw Preston Mercer steal your wages. I saw Rachel Dawson spread lies about you. I saw you count pills you could not afford and cry in an empty apartment so your son would not hear. And I saw you keep going anyway. He paused, stepping closer. The scent of expensive cologne and something harder, something like winter rain, moved between them. I have lived 42 years in a world built on blood and fear. I lost my daughter before I ever heard her cry. I buried her in a cemetery I visit alone because I never learned how to carry that grief with anyone else. I built an empire, but I never built a family. Nora covered her mouth. Her shoulders shook. And then you gave your blood to save a stranger's child, Luca said, his voice dropping to almost a whisper now, not knowing who he was, not asking for anything in return. And I realized something that changed everything. What? Nora asked, the word barely audible. That some people enter our lives not by accident but by necessity. That saving others is sometimes the only way we save ourselves. And that the woman who gave her blood to my grandson had already given me back my reason to live. Nora's tears fell freely now. She could not speak. The city lights blurred through her eyes like a watercolor painting of before and after. Luca continued, his gaze never leaving her face. I destroyed Preston Mercer and Rachel Dawson not because you asked me to, you never did. You never asked for anything. I did it because a world that punishes kindness and rewards cruelty is a world I will not allow to stand. You deserved justice. You deserve to breathe again. And I needed to be the one who made that possible, because for the first time in 15 years, I wanted to save someone instead of bury them. He stepped back, giving her space, the gesture itself an act of restraint. You do not have to say anything. I needed you to know the truth I carried for 1 year, that you saved more than Matteo's life. You saved mine, too. He turned toward the balcony doors. His shadow stretched long across the penthouse floor. Wait. Nora reached out, her hand catching his wrist. His skin was warm, solid, real. He stopped. Turned back to her. She looked up at this dangerous man who had knelt in the shadows to lift her out of the darkness, and said softly, her voice steady now despite everything, "Thank you for choosing to stay when the storm arrived." Something shifted in Luca's expression, barely perceptible, but there. A crack in the fortress he had built over 4 decades. Always, he said, and the word carried the weight of a vow. The penthouse balcony held them both as the city glittered below. Oliver slept safely in a new apartment with his own room, his nightmares finally quieting. Matteo played in Luca's home, alive because a stranger had given her blood without knowing it would save a grandfather's heart. Sophia's grave held fresh flowers, and her name was finally spoken without breaking the man who had carried her loss in silence. Family is not always bound by blood, but by those who choose to stay when the storm arrives. Nora Bennett gave her blood to a stranger and received a future she never imagined. Luca Calabrese saved a life and found redemption he did not know he needed. In a city built on power and fear, 2 broken people discovered that the strongest bonds are forged not in comfort, but in the willingness to carry each other through the darkness. Preston Mercer sits in federal prison, 38 years remaining on his sentence, his name erased from every payroll in Seattle. Rachel Dawson's social foundation collapsed within months, her reputation destroyed not by violence but by truth. Justice is not always immediate, but when it comes, it is absolute. And sometimes, the people we save are the ones who save us in return. If this story moved you, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to this channel because tomorrow we are bringing you another story about love, justice, and the choices that define us. Drop a comment telling us, have you ever been saved by a stranger's kindness? What would you have done if you were in Nora's place? Every comment you leave is a precious source of motivation that helps us continue creating stories about the invisible people who deserve to be seen. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. Goodbye, and we will see you again in the next video.